Hello, everyone. We'll be talking about CPT today. Now, in the past lectures, what we were talking about is introducing you to the guidelines surrounding ICD, and then we'll start talking about the body systems more in general with the coding of the ICT and the CPT. But right now, we're just going to do an overview of things that you need to know about CPT. And just about everything that we're going to talk about today is something that you could be tested on. I'll try to flag it for you and say, hey, yeah, this would make a good test question. But again, this is an overview. This is the beginning. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed as we're talking about it, because as you build practice and some of the things that we'll mention, it'll just get easier and easier. Another thing that I want to remind you about is that all the information that I'm giving you is in your CPT manuals. All right, so it's not things that you need to memorize. It's going to be right there at your fingertips. So that's always a good thing to know ahead of time. I don't think this will be too intimidating, but we're going to have fun with it. So the first thing that you need to know is kind of an overview of what we've mentioned with ICD, medical coding. What is medical coding? Now, you've heard me say again and again, and I'll probably continue to say it, that medical coding is a way for us to collect statistics. It's the reason we code is for statistical purposes. It just happens to be a convenient way to get paid, right? So that's really what, for the most part, everybody talks about is reimbursement. And CPT for outpatient is the way that we are reimbursed. It's not based on the ICD codes that we've talked about in the guidelines in the chapters you've already looked at. This is, in fact, how in outpatient we are being reimbursed. It is also a language. So I mentioned, probably you heard me say when you looked at another lecture, that when you were a kid, maybe you came up with a secret code with your friends or your siblings and stuff. It's kind of what the coding for both CPT and ICD is. It's kind of a secret code that we get to translate. What it does is, with CPT specifically, it translates or transforms what we do to the patient. And what we do to the patient is give services. There's procedures that are done, the supplies that are used, and the drugs. They're all going to be reflected through CPT and HCPCS codes. The HCPCS are called HCPCS codes. Now, with diagnosis codes, they do the same thing. They take the diagnosis and explain why we're doing the procedure. Okay, so it gives medical necessity. This is for outpatient. With inpatient coding, if you continue and you, whether you're already an inpatient coder or you're going to continue to get inpatient coding training in the future, it's a little bit different because the ICD codes carry more weight, and that's how you get paid. But for outpatient with CPT, that is what is the reimbursement is being driven by those CPT codes and HCPCS codes. When we look at the services that are being provided, they're divided up into levels. We have Category 1 levels, we have Category 2 levels, and we have Category 3 levels. So we'll talk about Category 2 in a minute. Let's talk about Category 1 and Category 3. And I'm going to reiterate this again as we get closer to the end of the lecture. We'll kind of do a recap of some of the things. But with a category, or excuse me, a level 1 code, Category 1. Now, let me correct what I'm saying. You have a level 1 and level 2 of codes, all right? So level 1 is CPT codes, which would be Category 1 and Category 3. Level 2 is your HCPCS codes, and that's a different manual, all right? We'll talk about those as well in the future. HCPCS codes are level 2 codes. They always start with a letter. They're alphanumeric, right? So you'll always be able to distinguish those when you see them. And it mostly is talking about supplies and medication that you're giving them. So let's go back to the level 1 codes. They are the CPT codes, and they're in category 1 and category 3. With the category 1, that's mostly what you're dealing with. These are regular CPT codes, and this is the bulk of what you'll be tested on if you're sitting for the CPC exam, is the category 1 codes, right? This is explaining what is being done to the patient. Category 3 codes are temporary codes, and we'll explain those a little more in depth. Just know, for your own reference, and you probably never need to know this except for maybe testing purposes, because it's just something that's understood, that level 1 is category 1 and 3, and level 2 is HCPCS codes. All right, that would make a good test question. All right, do you need to know that necessarily in the outside world? I personally, working, you never refer to codes as level 1, level 2, or their category. You just say CPT code, you might say temporary code, or and HCPCS codes. That's what you refer them to, and you just know that they're category 1 and category 3. Right. Now, in documentation, where not from the provider, but maybe from the biller, you might see that mentioned. They say, well, we need a different category 1 code, meaning they just need another CPT code, a different CPT code. Okay. With diagnosis coding that we've already reviewed a little bit of the guidelines, chapter-specific guidelines, what you do need to remember, though, is that they are distinguished by being diagnosis codes and not procedure codes. It's ICD-10-CM. This is a classic test question. It's an easy test question, and you'll see it used over and over again. Just memorize that ICD stands for International Classifications of Diseases. And again, when you see these done in test questions, they may give you multiple choice that says, what does ICD-10-CM stand for? And it'll say International Classification of Diagnoses. And then, the International Category of Diseases. Do you need to know this in the real world? Probably not necessarily. They're just ICD codes, but you will be tested on it. All right. So know that it's International Classification of Diseases, and that it's the 10th revision, right? And the CM stands for clinical modification. We are the only ones in the world that use ICD-10-CM, clinical modifications. Other countries, I think Canada's is International Classifications of Diseases, 10th revision, and it's CA for Canada. So different. And I think Finland, I had a pen pal in Finland that was a coder, and I think theirs is FN. So that's how they kind of distinguish what country you're in and what's using them. You don't need to know that for testing purposes. Just know that the CM stands for clinical modification. So why do we code? Because quite honestly, computers can do that, right? Computers translate all the time. And I know a lot of people are worried about coding jobs because now the providers bring in their laptops, and they are actually, filling out and documenting the template and working on that all while they're seeing the patient, which is a whole nother story. But the computer could technically do that. But the problem is to get to the highest specificity, the descriptions for the codes, a computer can't do that. They can't get to the highest specificity. They can't always, they're only as smart as the person that programs them, right? A computer is. There's always room for error. So whether you are the traditional coder that was coding 10 years ago, maybe your role changes a little bit now that we have computers to supplement and assist us with what we do, and we can be faster and get to that higher specificity quicker because we're able to reference faster versus being able, having to look through a manual. But they can't necessarily get to the specificity or program in the guidelines that are unique to the documentation that needs to be done. So maybe your role changes and you're more of an auditor, an auditing role now. And then I've already seen that happen in a lot of ways. The codes, the provider selects the codes that he thinks or she thinks are the correct codes, but then when it gets to the coder, they're in there adjusting everything and making, there's exceptions to the rules and defaults and things like that. And all those guidelines that we just talked about in those previous lectures, are programmed in, but the human mind can get to a higher specificity, right? And look at that documentation and pull that information out probably more effectively than the computer can. Maybe someday it'll be different, but it isn't there. So computers are not taking our jobs, right? Our roles may change a little bit, but we are the ones that allow us to get to the highest specificity. So when did CPT start? And again, this is information that would be good for testing purposes, but you're probably not going to necessarily need to know the year that the AMA developed the CPT codes. Yeah, you might see it on a test though, but when you get out there and work, you do need to know who creates the CPT codes. That's the AMA, and that's the American Medical Association. They own CPT. They have a monopoly on CPT, and the government requires us to use CPT. So the AMA created CPT back in 1966. So it's been around for a long time. It was created for statistical purposes. And again, then it was developed into a way for us to get reimbursed for outpatient procedures. You do need to know that every November, the AMA creates the next year's codes. So every year in November, the new codes for the next year will be released, and they will be implemented on January 1st of every year. Okay, so you get a heads up before January. You get a little bit of time to order your new manuals and get the updates and everything. That is something you need to keep in the back of your mind, that every year you get a new manual. As far as testing is concerned, you always want to test with manuals that the year you're testing in. Okay, so whatever year it is that you're going to test, that's the year that you want to see on those manuals, both ICD, CPT, and HCPCS. That's another whole lecture about why you want to do that, but know that the codes are updated every year. Now, for the most part, a lot of CPT codes don't change, but they do. We get new codes, some codes are dropped. So again, there's revisions in the terminology and the verbiage, but for the most part, it's the same, but you want to test with the year that you are in because of those changes. Now, we've already talked about the codes being divided up in category 1, 2, and 3. What do those categories mean? With category 1, those are the procedure codes. Those are the ones that you're, for the most part, being tested on. You're tested on all of them in the manuals, but that's the bulk of what you'll be using in real life. And so they want to make sure that you understand the guidelines surrounding them. As we go through here, you're going to learn how to code and pick up codes from your manual. It's pretty easy, quite honestly, to find the code. And as long as you're paying attention to the description, it's like looking up a name in a phone book. I say again and again, it's not hard to do. However, what becomes difficult is understanding the guidelines, and that's truly what you're being tested on, the guidelines, not the codes necessarily themselves, but the guidelines, the rules that surround those codes. So category 1 code, that's the bulk of what you are going to be studying, and that's the bulk of what your CPT manual covers. Category 2 codes are supplemental codes. These codes are used for tracking performances, and again, all of these codes are statistical, but category 2, that is their purpose. They're statistical only. And just a little note that you may put these on the billing ticket, but you don't charge for these. These are statistical codes instead. And category 3 codes are temporary codes. They're mostly used for technology that's happening, services and procedures that are new. And we like to call those baby codes. They don't get to be grown-up real codes for a while. So what happens is these temporary codes are implemented. Those ones that you see that usually have a T in them, you'll see a lot, but you still use them, okay, when they're applicable, because they want to track and see how often they're being used. If they're used frequently enough and the AMA implements them, that next year is a new code, right? So they're little baby codes, learning to be grown-up codes based on if you use them or not, right? And they're for statistical purposes as well. Let's talk about the examples of the CPT codes. They're divided up. You've got medical, surgical, you've got diagnostic services, meaning we're going to do a procedure to try to figure out what a diagnosis is. We're going to go in and explore the abdomen to see, to get a biopsy for the mass that was seen on a scan. Okay, so it's diagnostic. There's anesthesia. Anesthesia is at the front of your manual, and it has its own section, anesthesia codes. They'll start with 00. They're the first of all of the codes. Then you have the category 2 and 3 codes. They're all in alphanumeric order. Category 2 codes just do performance measures, and category 3 or that emerging technology that I mentioned before. So you're going to have medical, you're going to have surgical, you're going to have your diagnostic services, and anesthesia. That's the main part of what you'll be working with. The CPT codes, again, kind of just reiterating what I've already told you, it allows us to communicate more effectively and more efficiently. And that's why I said statistical purpose, it just happens to be a convenient way to get paid. And I got an example of that coming up, and you'll see, oh yeah, it's a lot easier to do a code. I don't know how many of you, because I don't think they do it anymore really, but do you remember shorthand? Maybe you went to tech school when you were in high school, and if you were going to study business or secretarial services and stuff like that, that they would teach you shorthand. I didn't learn shorthand, but I remember my grandmother had an old book where she had learned shorthand because she was a administrative assistant in Washington, D.C. years and years and years ago. So again, she was a secretary and knew shorthand very well. So I had this really ancient little book that was so cute with shorthand. And that's kind of the way I think of coding. It's kind of like modern day shorthand for the medical services and the diagnoses. It's much more effective and efficient to communicate what we need to. It is a mechanism to report the services that are specific to CPT or the level 2 codes that we talked about. But ultimately, again, just keep in your mind when you think of all of this stuff that the CPT codes and the ICD-10 codes are ways for us to capture diseases and procedures and services for a patient so that we can catch them all over the world quite honestly. And this is how we know that, for example, if my mother is, finished up her treatments for breast cancer, but because of ICD, we knew what type, she had 2 types of breast cancer. We knew exactly what 2 types of breast cancer that she had, and because of that was ICD, and then with CPT, we know exactly the treatments and the services that were provided. Even because of the HCPCS, we know the medication that was given to her for her cancer to be eradicated. And because of those codes, we know how many people in the very county that she lived in, which is Morgan County, in the state that she's in, how many people had her type of cancer and were given that specific type of treatment and the outcome, all because of the codes that were delivered during her care. So that's pretty exciting. It determines, what type of treatment that she's going to have based on what's worked in the past for other people, versus, maybe a treatment that is new, a temporary code, right, that's being used. So it's very, very exciting to know that you're a part of that. So here's that example I was going to tell you about. Look at this description. Do you want me to read that? Renal endoscopic through nephrostomy or pileotomy, with or without irrigation, installation, or uteropilography, exclusive of radiologic service with endopileotomy, includes cystoscopy, ureteroscopy, dilation of ureter and uretropelvic junction, and insertion of endopileotomy stent. Now, I apologize to our transcriptionist for having to type all of that. But you could say all of that and write all of that, or you could just use the CPT code 50575. You choose, right? So now we see that where that code, that secret or that exciting code that we talked about being a kid and coming up with, it's a lot of fun to kind of play around with those, especially with ICD. You can see people that get T-shirts that say, "I feel very," and they'll like R da 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 da, and they even have, my daughter wears a wristband that has an R code on it that I got at a conference one time because it was purple and she liked it. And it is R codes are like signs and symptoms. So I can't remember what it was, but it had something about a stressful day, I think. So you could have this huge description with all of this specific information in it, or you could just write 50575. Very simple, much easier to deal with, right? That's one of the reasons we do what we do and we understand our codes. So the codes themselves, they're going to be used by these third-party payers. The payers, that's where the reimbursement comes in, right? So again, it's really for statistical purposes, but everybody understands it to be a way for us to get paid. And with outpatient, that's where CPT comes in. That's what carries the weight, is the CPT. So what happens if you code the incorrect code, right? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is that your provider will either not be reimbursed to the level that they deserve for the work that they did, or they'll be reimbursed too much. Ultimately, there is an inappropriate payment that's going to be made. If it's an underpayment, then again, that really reflects on the ability for the provider to be able to do what they do. This is how they pay the light bill, right? This is how they pay their clinicians. This is how they get pens and pencils and supplies. This is how they pay the rent for the building that they're using. This is how they pay their malpractice insurance. Everything is based on the reimbursement for the services that they're rendering, and they should get reimbursed at the maximum level for the services that they provide. And to do that, they are assisted by you as the experts in translating the procedures that they do, the services that they provide, into the codes being sent to the payer for reimbursement. Not only does it affect your ability to, pay the light bill, but it also makes you at a liability risk. The provider is at a liability risk if they're getting overpayments. If you're coding at a higher level of service than what they're providing, then you're setting up yourself for being audited for fraud and abuse, especially when you're dealing with Medicare or Medicaid. Right? There's millions and billions of dollars that are captured every year that is classified as fraud and abuse. And when that happens, that takes away money for services that can be provided to a larger amount of people. So they're Medicare is one of they have the most fraud and abuse of any other type of insurance provider in the United States. So they watch it very, very carefully. Now, just step back, take a deep breath, because I can feel you, looking at this saying, oh my gosh, am I going to go to jail? What if I make a mistake? Don't worry about that, because right now we're just making you aware that it's your responsibility as the coder in the office that you work with or whoever you're working with to be the expert to see that all of this stuff is being done correctly and you're getting the proper knowledge and training to do that. So don't be hard on yourself. It's a lot easier than you think, and you have so many resources at your fingertips, not only to make you better at what you do, but to catch it if a mistake's ever made so that it doesn't move forward. Okay. So yes, it is a responsibility, but you can do it. So think of it yourself as being a first-time parent. You're upset, but you're excited, and you're upset because you're worried about, can I do this? Am I going to be a good parent? And then when you actually have that baby in your arms and you start learning on the job, that's how you do it. That's a lot of what happens with the coding as well. You'll have mentors and people helping you along the way. And as you work, you will get better and better. Bulk of your training will be out on the job. Right? You're going to learn how to code and be responsible and be able to check yourself. But the bulk of that knowledge after you get your coding credential, you'll learn stuff every day. So who actually uses these codes? Well, pretty much everybody in the medical field. So you have your clinics, your doctor's offices, definitely your hospitals, and they have outpatient and inpatient. You have rehabilitation units that also use the coding. Ambulance services, a lot of times people don't realize that ambulance services use codes. Long-term care facilities, and it really is everybody that has a provider. Anytime a provider touches a patient in any way, they're going to use codes for reimbursement and statistical purposes. Right. So you're really hard pressed to think of anybody in the medical field that won't be touched by codes. And when we talk about clinics, that would also involve things like dentists, mental health, as well as the chiropractor, right? So everybody will be using those codes. When these codes are reported, they're all reported electronically. Now, in the past, they would a lot of times be sent in via mail. Some things were faxed and stuff, but everything now is required to be reported electronically, and that's how the billing system is set up, is electronically. The codes are put on a form, a specific form that's called the CMS 1500 form. This is a universal form for the US. So whenever you're dealing with outpatient procedures and diagnoses, that information will be printed out on the CMS 1500 form. It's a different form if you're working with inpatient hospitals. That's a UB04 form. So it looks a little bit different, but for the most part, the content will be the same. You're just dealing with outpatient versus inpatient services. And we've got an example of what that form looks like. It's usually in red, at least it was when we did, when you get a hard copy of these. With it being electronic, I don't know if they make them red or not. All of this information that's filled out on this form is pertinent to the patient, the provider, and the payer. Okay, so this is the form that you communicate all the information to the payer on. It, for the most part, unless you're going to be doing a lot of billing, as a coder, you may never ever see this form. Or if you're working in an office where you're doing the coding and the billing, this form is very important, and it's done electronically. All right, so you're gonna literally fill in the data. It's a fill in the blank, and the cursor will, you just tab over to the next box, and it will not let you move forward unless you've filled out the information that needs to be filled out. And remember, this is a claim form, so you will see information about the patient's occupation. And for example, this box 10, they want to know, are you employed? Is this an auto accident or other accident? Why would they do that? For workman's comp, right? Auto insurance, all that stuff's in there. So you think, well, so that's not pertinent to the coder themselves. No, not necessarily. This down here is where you'll be filling in the information regarding the patient's procedures, and here's the diagnoses. You'll be putting them up here. Again, the doctor's NPI number, all of that's in here, as well as the address of where the services are being provided. If you work for a doctor's office, there may be autofill on some of this stuff, right? And you just have to approve it. But it doesn't take long to fill these out. We used to, when I was teaching the college, required, I think my students had to do 60 of these for that segment of the course, and they typed everything in by hand onto the computer screen, just like you would, and then they printed them out, and I would go through and make sure all the documentation was correct. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, they're the ones that create this. And again, don't let it intimidate you. As a coder, you may be in a position where you are directly dealing with these, and you may not. The format of CPT. Let's talk about that now, because this is very important in a bulk of what you'll be dealing with on a daily basis. These are things that you'll memorize, but don't worry, it's all in your manual. There's a legend at the bottom of your manual that tells you what all these symbols and everything are used for. So again, there are symbols with CPT. We're going to talk about them. There are triangles, which if you see a triangle, it means that there's been a change to that code. And there's a little lightning bolt that says, you know, this particular procedure isn't approved by the FDA, which also means it probably isn't going to be reimbursed. They're giving you examples here, but the next screen will actually show you pictures, which is probably more beneficial. So here is a bullet that tells you that it's a new code. Whenever you see this little dot, then you're going to know that that's a new code for that year, right? If you see a pound sign in front of a code, that means it's been resequenced. All of the codes in your CPT manual, and you're dealing with these 5 numbers, they're sequenced. However, they're in numerical order, but every once in a while you'll have codes that are moved for whatever reasons. And you'll see this a lot in the E&M codes. Don't freak out when you're looking for an E&M code and you're looking in the tabular and you can't find it. And you'll see like 99, I'm just making this up on the hub, 99583, and you can't find it, and you go to 99582 and it's not after that. Well, it may be a few pages over because it's a specific category, another reason why they moved it. So if you see a pound sign next to a code, that means it's been resequenced. It's in a different order than it was previously. That triangle, again, means it's a revised code. Usually this has something to do with the description, the verbiage in the code itself. And there's lots of examples. Just flip through. You probably will never have a chance to have two manuals in front of yourself, in front, but know that there's a place in the back of your manual, your little appendix, that talks about all the changes. So don't worry too much. It could be something as simple as a new code was created, and now there's not, it doesn't say any site, it's more specific. Okay, and so that means it was revised. Whenever you see arrows or triangles, that is going to also let you know that there has been a change in the description of the code. So where you see R here with the arrows, that means that wasn't there before. Same thing down here, they added, they may be placed. Okay, so that's all that means, is that there has been a change in the text, and the arrows are revealing that. And you see this a lot in the guidelines. Every year they tweak and usually make the guidelines more specific. A very important symbol that you need to be aware of is the plus sign. Now, whenever you see a plus symbol in front of a code, that means it's an add-on code. We'll talk about add-on codes more in depth later, but what an add-on code means is we're extending the description, that it may or may not be applicable, but it always is an add-on code to this code. So we've got 11000, and we've got the description here, which I'm not going to read. But if we need to expand the information for 11000, it may be applicable to also code 11001, which you'll see is each additional 10% of the body surface, et cetera, right? There's some specifics you need to be aware of with add-on codes. Now, one thing is, you notice here it says use 1100 run in conjunction with 11000. That means you cannot use it anyplace else. So let's say you've got another code, 11002. It's not an add-on code. It doesn't have a plus symbol in front of it, but you cannot use 11002 and 11001. Now, that doesn't mean because it's out of sequence, it means that it is only applicable to the code above it. All right. Now, don't freak out, because you'll always have a note here. It may say you can use 11001 in conjunction with 11000 and 11002. Okay. It's an add-on code. It's a supplement. It means that there's more to the code that we need to add, but it doesn't have its own standalone code. You will never see this code used by itself, right? You will never see a code with a plus symbol used as a first listed. It always has to be a backup to another code, right? You will be tested on that. That is classic guidelines that you'll see in multiple choice options. Okay, so be very, very aware of that. You can only use the add-on code with another specific code, and it would be listed after that. You can never use it alone, like I said. You cannot use it for a reduction of multiple services, and if you want to know all of the add-on codes that exist in your manual, you can go to Appendix D, which is in the back. Now, I honestly have never referenced Appendix D, but that doesn't mean anything necessarily because the bulk of what I do is in ICD anyway, all right? The reason you may not ever have to look at Appendix D is because the information's right there in the tabular, right? So you have your index where you look up the code, and then the tabular that gives you the description, right? And the add-on codes are right there in the tabular. If you see the symbol, I call this a not symbol, but it's a circle with a strike through, circle with a line, that means you cannot use modifier 51 with this code. Now, we'll talk about modifier 51 in a moment, but modifier 51, whenever you see a dash and then two numbers, that indicates it's a modifier. And so whenever you see the dash, you just say modifier. Very seldom will you have anybody write out modifier when you can just write a dash, right? Modifier 51 is not used with this code. And so now you're saying, well, what's modifier 51? Well, it has to do with multiple procedures being done in the same day. And we'll talk about modifiers later. Don't worry about that right now. Just know that if you see this, what I call a not symbol or a circle with a line, meaning that that is specific to modifier 51 and you cannot use it. If you, again, want to see all of the codes that are exempt from modifier 51, that's in Appendix E. Now, would it be faster to go look it up in Appendix E, or would it be just faster to go look it up in tabular and see if it's got a circle, a not symbol in front of it? You know, and again, it has to do with multiple procedures being done. If you see just the circle, that means that it's recycle or a code that's been reinstated from a previous year, right? That's all that means, that this code is, it's not a new code, because that would be the solid circle, right? The solid dot. But when you see a circle, that means that this is a code that had been used in the past. It's been recycled or reinstated. Okay. Now let's talk about those appendixes that I alluded to. If you want to know all of the modifiers, which we'll talk about them later in another lecture, they are listed in two places. They are listed in the front of your manual on the front cover. That's kind of like a quick lookup, and you'll use that a lot. But if you want more of a description about that modifier and even an example of the use of that modifier, you can go to Appendix A. This is something that you will reference a lot, especially as you're learning. Eventually, a lot of those modifiers in your everyday that you use repeatedly, you'll memorize them. Okay, maybe not before you've tested, but out there when you're working, you know, you just get to where, you know, I still look them up though, because I tend to forget, you know, and I want to say, which was it modifier 50 or 51 that meant multiple procedures? I got to go look, you know. So again, Appendix A is one that you will use. And when you do your BAT technique and you work through the blitz and we talk about what will help you test and test faster, we usually say this is a good area to tab. So Appendix A is a good place to have a little tab in there, a little color tab, so that you can quick reference to double check what the modifier is. And it'll always be in your front cover, but if you need a little more of a description, it's right there in Appendix A, and you want to use that. When you're being tested and they use the questions on modifiers, they're going to want to make sure you know the difference between modifiers that are very similar. And so I would take time to go look at Appendix A, and make even little notes as you get to that area of the lecture that we'll do in another day. Appendix B is a list of any addition, deletions, and revisions. For the most part, you know, you may not look at that too much unless you're looking up a deletion. It's like, I can't find that code. Did they delete that code? You can go and look real quick in Appendix B and say, oh, wow, they deleted that code. I'm not going crazy, right? Appendix C is examples for clinical examples and E&M codes. That's helpful, right? Now, do you need that when you test? No, but this is where you're learning and you need examples to kind of flesh out what the codes are used for. Appendix D, I already mentioned that that's all the add-on codes. Appendix E is all of the codes that are modifier 51 exempt. And then there's another one that is modifier 63 exempt, and that's in Appendix F. Appendix G is used to include moderate sedation. And so that, I think, though they may have deleted in, yeah, they deleted in 2017. So they may or may not ask you about that, you know, but that wouldn't be necessarily a very good test question. What was Appendix G used for? Especially if it's not relevant anymore, right? But it will still be in the manual. Okay, it'll be in your manual forever, and it'll say what it's used for, and then it'll say it's deleted, and then there just won't be anything else on the page. And you're, they do that often. So Appendix H is for performance measures. These are category 2 codes, and there's a website that you can go out and look at those. Appendix I it was deleted way back in 2013 for genetic testing modifiers, but they still added in here. They don't skip the letters. Appendix J is electrodiagnosis medicine listings, and then Appendix K is products pending FDA approval. Now, you're probably not going to look at that for testing purposes, but if it's pending FDA approval, it's not going to be reimbursed. So if you've got a provider that is, you know, put something on there and you're looking at that, it's like, man, I don't see that code, or it's like, I don't think that's paid for yet, you might want to go to Appendix K and reference that. Appendix L, vascular families. I would tab this as well. And one of the reasons I would tab this is because vascular families are very hard to understand at first. Once you get to working with them, and especially if you're in cardiology or any of the other type of interventional radiology codes that are used or services that are provided, then you know these will become more familiar with. But I can guarantee you that when you turn to Appendix L and you first start looking at that, your mind is your mind's going to be blown. You're thinking, oh my word. So just be aware that Appendix L is there for to track vascular families. Ultimately, is a quick reference. What that means is any of the vessels that go off the aorta. Right, so it's just like a tree. You've got your tree trunk here, and then it branches off, and these are vascular families, and then they branch off, and they, you know, and it's like a tree. And that's what Appendix L reveals for you. You will get questions on vascular families when you test. There won't be very many, maybe only 1 or 2, but you'll know that you can go to Appendix L to reference if you need to. Appendix N, resequence CPT codes, and Appendix O is things that are done for analysis. So now let's talk about the sections of the CPT manual. Again, you have your index and you have your tabular. Right, so the index is one section. I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up here because I think the index is much more important than some of these other things. So you'll have your index, and that's where you're going to find out where your code is located. These are going to be your quick reference. Just like you've got a textbook and you go to the index to find, you know, any information about George Washington, you're going to look up Washington, George, and then it's going to tell you what page it's on. ultimately, the index for your CPT manual, you're going to look up a procedure. You want to look up removal, and then it says appendectomy. Okay, so that's all done in the index. The CPT manual is only published by the AMA. So everybody's CPT manual in the United States looks exactly the same. And literally, you're on the same page always if you're in the same year. So whatever year you're looking at, know that, you know, somebody on the other side of the United States, if they say, hey, turn to page 630, they're going to be looking at the same page you're looking at. Okay. Then you've got your listing in the back of the manual, the category 2 and 3 codes, and all of your appendixes. They're all at the back of the manual. But when you open up your manual, the first thing that you're going to see is all those guidelines, right? And you're going to reference those pretty frequently. And then the codes that are listed first are evaluation and management codes, which we call them E&M codes. Nobody says evaluation and management. Nobody wants to say that much. They're E&M codes. So these are the codes that determine the level of service that the provider is giving, whether it's an established patient or a new patient. That pays different. Okay, whether it is how much time and the different evaluations, how much history, et cetera, that the provider goes over with the patient when he's evaluating and managing the care for that encounter, right? We'll talk about that a lot more in depth later. Then you have your anesthesia codes. Now, your E&M codes are going to start with 99, and then they go to 0. The anesthesia codes always start with a 0. They are their own little section. They're encapsulated by themselves, the anesthesia codes. Surgery codes are next, and then as we go from the surgery codes out, the codes go up in numerical order. They're all 5 characters. Okay, then so you have surgery, radiology, path and lab, and medicine. And we'll definitely study each of those sections. Now, how are the codes categorized? Again, my brain does not work in this description: section, subsection, subheading, categories. I don't think that, oh, I'm in the section for surgery. I just know that I'm in that section because we're doing a surgery, right? Subsection, I don't think of it as a subsection. I think of, oh, we're doing surgery on the nervous system, right? And that's the way your brain will work too. When you're testing, you may get some questions that say, you know, that specify this, but people don't say, well, I was looking in subsection for the nervous system and da 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 da. No, we did a surgery on the, you know, they're having surgery on their brain. That's going to be surgery, the nervous system. Okay. So again, you need to be aware of this, but in the real world, we don't think of section, subsection, subheading, and categories because they are what they are, right? And that is the way my brain would think is, if you're telling somebody your phone number and you know they're from out of town, you're going to give them the area code. You're not going to say, my area code is 999, right? You're just going to say, my phone number is 999-555-4444. Okay. So you're not going to say, my telephone, my, you know, area code is 999. The prefix to my phone number is 555, and my the last 4 digits are 444. Okay. You just know what it is because this is the way it's set up. So as we describe what the headings are called, this is the information that you need to know. So you're going to know what section you're in. Are you in surgery? Are you in medicine? Are you in path and lab? Are you in anesthesia? Are you in E&M? Okay. So if you're looking in E&M, you need to be in that section. That means you're going to be at the front of the manual. All the E&M codes are at the front of the manual. Path and lab are going to be down at the end of the manual. All right. Okay, so subsection, surgery, but all the body systems that we can do surgery on are going to be the subsystem. are we going to be, our subsection, are we going to be in the nervous system? Are we doing cardiovascular, et cetera, et cetera? Now, that subsection, when you look at your manuals, and again, when you open the manual and you look at surgery, right, that very first page of surgery codes, and it'll be a code range that you look at, it will have this listed, okay? And then it'll say nervous system, and it's kind of like when you, what's that called? When you outline, you're outlining the story. This is the outline of those codes. So saying, we're doing surgery. This is the nervous system that we're doing surgery to, specifically skull, meninges, and brain, okay? And then it indents again, just like you're outlining the story. So everything in this section is the nervous system. Then we're going to go to surgery on the cardiovascular system, and then it's going to do and divide itself. And under those subheadings, you're going to have ranges provided for you to tell you that if we're looking at an injection procedure for cerebral angiography, you're going to look at codes 36100 through 36218. Okay, and so they're just dividing up the sections for you, kind of giving you an overview of what's in that area of codes. And then the category is going to be injection, drainage, and aspiration. So we know injection, drainage, and aspiration is going to be 36100 through 36218. This is all in the beginning of each of those sections in your manual. So I said, you don't have to have the stuff memorized. It's all right there at your fingertips to look. So it can be a quick reference for you. Also, we're going to break it down even further, right? So then you got the description of anatomy. So what part of the body are we're in the nervous system, and we've broken it down to, you can even have the nervous system here. We're going to be the anatomy, we're going to be working on the knee or the shoulder. So let's say we have a problem with the nervous system, some of the nerves that are bundled in the shoulder. That would be the anatomy. What is the procedure that we're doing? Well, we're going to do an incision or an excision. It's going to just, we're going to indent. Or what's the condition? We have a fracture or a dislocation. Okay. Now again, nervous system, we're out of the nervous system. Description, what are we going to do for that condition? We've got a fracture, so we're going to put on a cast. That's the description. What if we're going to do a surgical approach? Then it's going to give you the information. Are we going to do anterior cranial? Are we going to do the fossa or middle cranial fossa? Cranial fossa or middle cranial fossa. Again, it breaks it down to a higher specificity, and that's how it's categorized. This is what it looks like in the front of your manual. When you look at this E&M code 99201, right, 201, it's going to tell you the clinical examples by specialty. So if you're in anesthesia, this is the example they give you. If you're doing pain, then this is the example. If you're doing ophthalmology, this is the example that they give you, right? So it just tells you everything. Surgical guidelines, always put in the beginning of each section for you to look at. The ones that you'll really pay a lot of attention to is in cardiovascular and also the integumentary system, because there's a whole description of the surgical guidelines on how to determine whether a repair is a simple repair, intermediate repair, or complex repair. So all of those guidelines that describes that will be in the surgery guidelines at the beginning of that integumentary system. Okay. Here's another example. There'll be notes, and these notes that are in those sections, you need to read them. You need to be familiar with them, because that is where the information is going to come from that you're going to be tested on. They're going to say, okay, I'm doing a simple repair of a laceration to the right forearm. Okay, so we got a simple laceration repair, and it's 4 centimeters long. Okay, so you're going to look and see what was a simple repair. Or what if they tell you it's they don't tell you it's a simple repair? You've got to determine if it was a simple repair by what the provider has documented, and you'll be able to do it because of the notes that are in there. Another thing that you need to be aware of is that you have standalone codes and indented codes. Now, we already talked about this a little bit when I showed you the add-on codes. The add-on codes aren't necessarily indented codes, but they are indented, right? It means they follow under that parent code is what I call them, a parent code. So if you have a standalone code and the description, the full description is right there, okay, then that code doesn't have an indent and it doesn't get to a higher specificity in that indent. But if you have a code that has an indented code underneath it or information underneath it that is extensive and then indents again, that means that it's dependent on the code above it, right? So the standalone code. So instead of a standalone code, I call it a parent code. Again, that's how my brain works, but the proper terminology and verbiage used for the CPT manual is to call it a standalone code. So that code that stands by itself has a full description, but if there's an indented code underneath it, then that means you have to have it's pertinent to the code above it, the parent code. So another thing you need to be aware of is that when you have an indented code, the verbiage changes after the semicolon. And this example I pulled out from our BAT technique that you'll learn about and the blitzes that come with the course. 31613, it is a tracheostoma revision. That's the parent. Okay, so there would be 31613, and then you're going to have another code, or the code for that's 613 says simple without flap rotation. Okay, so look at the semicolon, and what we teach you when you bubble and highlight, use the BAT technique, is that anything behind the semicolon needs to be highlighted because that's what separates it from the code above it and below it. So without having the next code, 31613 is probably going to be the same code, but after the semicolon, it would say simple with flap rotation, right? So there's a difference, and you have to be able to know the difference. And by highlighting after the semicolon, then you'll say, oh, no, this is simple. Yep, that's what this description says, but this one says without flap rotation. Oh, so it is 31613, and let's suppose that 614 is simple with flap rotation. No, that's not the one I want to use. Okay, so be very aware of that. That's the BAT technique, and that's going to help you code to a higher specificity and be much faster. So other code examples, types of codes, you've got 26010, you've got drainage of a finger abscess. There's the semicolon, and then you would highlight simple, complicated. Okay, so what we're saying is that if it's 26010, that code is strictly for drainage of a finger abscess simple. But if it's not simple, if it's complicated, it would be 26011. And this is information that would be after the semicolon. Complicated. And it's always indented. So here's your standalone code, your parent code, 26010. And if we're doing drainage of a finger abscess complicated, we're not going to use 26010. We're going to use 26011 because that is a higher description of, or a changed description of 26010. Right? So we know we don't have to repeat and retype that it's drainage of a finger abscess. We know that that's what it is. But after the semicolon, this is simple, 10, and complicated is 11. Anything after the semicolon is going to be the full description of the preceding code. And you have to look at the code above it, the parent code or the standalone code, to be able to tell what the full description is. Now let's talk a little bit about the modifiers. With the modifiers, again, it is a dash and then 2 characters, usually numbers, but you can have letters. Modifier 62, 2 surgeons performed a surgical procedure. So in other words, you're going to use the code. So you could use the code that we just did, which of course you wouldn't have 2 surgeons doing an abscess. But let's say, and I don't know the code for an appendectomy, but let's say we do an appendectomy and there were 2 surgeons that were performing this procedure. That would be, you would put the appendectomy code and then modifier 62 to say there were 2 surgeons, right? So what is it saying? It says each one of those surgeons is going to apply his or her individual skill to assist with that procedure. Also, each surgeon gets to bill the procedure with a modifier 62. So what does it tell the payer? That tells you that we're going to see this code for this patient twice because there were 2 surgeons, right? AS is for physician's assistant, and these are HCPCS modifiers, and F1 is left hand second digit. Now, like I said, not all modifiers have just numbers. Some of them have other characters, and that's an example. But all the modifiers are going to be in your CPT manual or your HCPCS manual at the front of your manuals. There'll be a quick lookup, and then in your CPT manual, of course, you have a more of a description of those. So here is, I gave you the example of the appendectomy, but here is one for a gastrojejunostomy. So 43820, modifier 62 tells us that there were 2 surgeons. 2 surgeons performed this gastrojejunostomy. And that means that the payer knows that 2 different providers are billing for this code. If that modifier 62 wasn't on there, only one of those surgeons would get paid because it indicates only one. It's understood that 1 provider did the procedure, not 2. Okay, modifiers that are sent in by Medicare require additional documentation a lot of the time. So that would go with your CMS 1500 form. And this is that area that I showed you in the CMS 1500 form, that one little area that you would be filling in the information. So you put the dates of the service, the place of the service, whether it be like an 11 or whatever, and then any of the codes. This is where you'd put that gastrojejunostomy, and then any modifier 62 would be put there. If you have unlisted services, meaning there's no category codes for that, no codes, then they would end in a 99. And an example is of an anesthesia procedure 01999. Meaning there really isn't, it's an unlisted anesthesia procedure. There's not a code for it. Whereas ICD, we have codes that are not otherwise NOS and NEC, you don't have that with CPT. So we have unlisted codes. And you have to report a special report whenever you use an unlisted code. Just be aware of them. So our category 1 codes, we're going to kind of recap now, and we're not quite wrapping it up, but we're almost there. So recapping category 1 codes, all of the category 1 codes are going to be start with a 00 and they're going to end with a 99, but not all 99 codes are at the end of the manual, because the E&M codes are 99 codes and they're at the beginning of the manual because they're an E&M section themselves. All the codes have been approved by the AMA and the Food and Drug Administration. So the HCPCS codes is what we're talking about, those. They are proven clinically effective, and that's why they get a code. So category 1 codes. Category 2 codes are those supplemental tracking codes. They're going to look like this alphanumeric. They're going to be like 1006F. And the F has a distinguished, I don't even know what that means. It doesn't really matter. It just tells it's a baby code. So a temporary code. You can always go to the AMA and look at more information about it, but they're doing performance measurements, and eventually it could turn into another code. not a real code, but a Category 1 code, a regular CPT code. Then you have temporary codes, and that's all new technology codes. So they're temporary. They could last up to 5 years, but they don't have a place in the CPT manual yet. They are after the medicine section. Okay, so they're at the end of the manual, and they'll look a lot like the other ones, 0042T, temporary, for temporary codes. They may become regular codes. Category 3 codes have not been approved. So that means that you're not getting paid for those. They're temporary codes that have not been approved yet, but hopefully will be approved in the future. And then you'll see them turn into a regular code when you'll get that little bullet symbol, right? Now that they won't look the same, they'll be assigned another number. Special or written reports. If you need to send in a special report because you use modifier 62, for example, then the information that needs to be on the report is you have to know the nature of the procedure that was being done. So what was being done, the extent that it was being done, the need, what was the medical necessity, how much time that it took, what was the additional effort that was required, was there any specific equipment that was used, and you can have the photos and medical journal articles if they're relevant and stuff like that. So again, you are trying to prove to the payer why you needed to append that modifier, or why that code was necessary, not just the modifiers, why you use this code. They may ask for a special report. It was this code, it was more complex due to all of these things. And this is pretty much what you see in every report. It's pretty standard in every report. So a special or written report, it's going to have all of the stuff probably in it anyway, because that's the way they write reports. What about that index? Always trust the index. The index is going to get you where you need to be. So it allows you to be able to locate quickly where you need to find the procedure via sequencing. It's not going to tell you a page number. It's going to say the code that you need is, 66552. Okay, so then you'll go numerically and find all the 6,000 codes, and then you'll find 66, etc. So it speeds up what you do in your coding, and it's just like using a dictionary. It's so simple, but be aware of first entries and last entries when you're looking at those, okay, because it does indent. Okay, this is what it looks like. I'm going to do a repair. I'm going to do a repair to what? The iris. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for, is the iris. And so what kind of a repair am I going to do? Am I going to do a suture, or is it going to be with a ciliary body, which is part of the eye? And then these are telling you where the codes would be. The X's are just placements. Now let's look at this other one, repair toe. Okay, so the last entry is toe, meaning if you go to repair, the first entry is an iris, and then there's all of these different body parts that you could repair, and the last entry is a toe, for example, is what they're saying. Presentation of the codes in the index. So you'll have a single code, which would be example of 38115. That's your code. Go look it up. But you could have multiple codes that are applicable, right? So for example, you look it up and it says, hey, it could be 26645 or 26650. Multiple codes. Whenever you see multiple codes, there's always a comma between them. So if you were to say, I did a procedure, you always put a comma between them, if you're writing them out. So it was this code and this code and this code. Or I'm saying that I did 26645 and I did 26650. I did both of those procedures. Whereas a range of codes will have the hyphen in it. So a range, you're not going to list a range of codes that you did. That's not the way it works. They're telling you how to find them. So I need to look in the range of 22310 through 22325 because all of those codes apply to the procedure that I did. So I'm going to go to 22310. I'm going to turn in the tabular and I'm going to look at those codes and see which one of those codes, those parent codes, has the description that meets what I did, okay, or the procedure that was done. That's a hyphen. So there's a range of codes versus a comma, which means this code and this code separately. Don't forget location methods. You are, when you're looking up a code, it's once you find out what you did, a repair or an excision, okay, that's what you look up. What did I do to the patient? I did a repair of a laceration. All right. Then you need to know where anatomically did you do that? So the anatomically, was it on the elbow? They're saying the median nerve. Okay. So let's not use the examples that they give, but let's come up with a story of our own. So I did a repair. Where did I do the repair? I did the repair on the forearm. Okay. And what was the condition? Well, it was a laceration. And the synonym, or is there any other names that apply to this area? Now, here it might be called upper extremity. Okay, so everything, both arms are upper extremities and the legs are lower extremities. Or it may say forearm, that you can use forearm versus hand, etc., etc. An eponym means just kind of it's more explaining the story because it has its own name. So a Jones procedure or a Heller operation means that this particular procedure was done so often that it was named after maybe the person that invented that particular procedure. Now you're not going to get that on a laceration, right? But you will get those on different types of, especially orthopedic procedures, heart procedures, things like that. So an eponym just means it's named after somebody or something. Abbreviation. You're not going to really have an abbreviation for a repair of a laceration, but let's say we did an EKG or an ECG or a PEEP. Those are abbreviation for procedures that are long, like I did a laparoscopic lap. I did a lap. Also, pressure breathing positive. Okay, PBP. Right. So just be aware of those as you're describing them. Always, always, always look at the index. The index is where you go first. But you never code from the index. You always code from the tabular. The reason you don't go straight to the tabular is because it takes too much time, right? You know, if you're looking up in your textbook about George Washington, okay, you know, if you know it's going to be about George Washington's birth, then you know it's probably going to be in the beginning of the description because that's how they do it, right? But you don't necessarily know in the book which presidents, which one is George Washington, even though it's probably first because George Washington was the first president. Okay, so why waste your time trying to find it and flip through pages? Just go to the index, look for Washington, George, birth, page, 32. Bam, you're there. That's what the index does for you, right? Then you locate the main term, and then you turn to that area, and it's going to give you either a code range or individual codes to look up, right? And then you have to make sure in the tabular you read the description very carefully because the description changes after the semicolon, right? You want to get to the highest specificity. You got to pay attention to with and without, simple, intermediate, complex, those type of things are going to be very important. When you are looking in the index and you see the word C, that means that you need to look at another term. So let's say you can also look up body parts in the index in the CPT manual. So let's say that you know that you're working on the part of the brain, okay, and you need to find the brain stem, but you could look up stem, brain, and it says go see brain stem, so that you would go look at brain, right? Or you could just look up brain stem and it's going to be listed there. But what if you didn't know that? And that's not necessarily, I think, the best example. Um, I can think of one on the top of my head. I should have planned ahead and had a better example for you. But again, just know it's, well, let's use our description that's not in the medical. Let's do Washington. So you know you want to look up Washington's birthday, and you want George Washington's birthday, not a different Washington. So you're going to look up Washington, then you're going to look up George, and it's going to say look under, and then say birth date. And then let's say it tells you see presidential birth dates. And then you go, oh, okay, so I go to presidential and say presidential birth dates. See what I mean? The index works the same way, right? And that's it. Any questions that you might have, feel free to jump out to the CCO Club. As our students, you have access to the CCO Club and you can ask questions in there. You have not only me, but the other instructors, the coaches, as well as students and subject matter experts that will be able to answer your questions. We're just getting started, all right? So this is just an introduction into CPT. We'll start fleshing all of this out and expanding upon the knowledge and building on it as we go, both with CPT and ICD. Okay, so again, check out on the CPT Club and enjoy the rest of your day. Happy learning, guys.